Hi, I'm Marcia Pierce. I am the Director of Solutions Architecture here at Pure Storage, and with me today is
Anthony Innocentino, Principal Field Solution Architect at Pure Storage.
All right, so today we're going to talk about application replication, right? You and I have both used application level replication for a long time.
Absolutely.
Traditionally, a lot of storage people would come to me and say, hey, we're going to get rid of your application level replication.
Why would you do that?
Because storage is so much simpler, and I usually would be like, go kick rocks. I don't agree with you at all.
Absolutely.
But I think storage technologies have changed. There's a lot of things that we do differently here at Pure, and having worked with both technologies for quite a long time, I think there are some things that we can replace, and there are some things that we can enhance when it comes to application level replication.
Okay.
So let's kind of get into that and talk about that a little bit, right?
Sounds fun.
So when you look at application level replication, right? When you're replicating at the application level, you're usually going to have two different databases right here. And you're going to have some kind of replication going over the network, right? If you were in the Microsoft world, this might be an AG, but there's all different kinds of application level replication where you're replicating that data between two different data nodes, right?
All right.
Right, and we've all dealt with this, and we've done this in the past. But I think one of the pain points that I hear about customers talking about is that when you're doing this, right, you've got two different databases. So there's a 2x factor at minimum for storage.
Right.
But, the more of these that you have, there's a factor of X. So, if you have 3 or 4 of them, that's a 3 to 4x cost for that. So how can we help out customers in this scenario?
Right. So looking at the diagram that Marcia just drew, for each individual copy of that database, I have to have that much storage to support that workload. And so let's talk about how FlashArray can help us out in this scenario. And so we want to look at FlashArray, and inside of FlashArray, when we provision something like an availability group or application level replicas at the app tier, what's going to happen inside of the array when we bring that database up is that's going to data reduce out. So our database here is going to share the same blocks across the physical storage of the array because of the array's data reduction capabilities. Now, looking at this diagram right here, you might see that, well, there's certainly a failure domain inside of the array. And so we want to be able to protect against that. And we'll look at that scenario momentarily. But for some customers, this is okay because FlashArray providing 7 nines of availability might be sufficient for the risk that your business is willing to take. But for those larger customers or the customers that can't take that type of risk, we certainly could take that data and have another replica on another array. So this being another array, whether it be in the same data center or between data centers. And so having that copy of that database available on that other flash array. So these would all be replicating inside of the app tier. Now, we would get data reduction within this first array, right? So that database would dedupe out and the blocks would be data reduced. On the other flash array, that would be another set of data. So we would have to have multiple copies of that. So just depending on your availability posture, this might be sufficient for recovery purposes. Now, are there other nuances of this, Marcia, that you're interested in?
Well, I think that's really interesting, like you pointed out, right? Because a lot of small to mid-tier customers are going to have a singular array, right, in their environment.
Right.
And so this is a really good scenario. Also, cost is probably a factor for them. So that space saving is going to be really good. So the other thing that we were kind of talking about when you look at these different having these different databases and doing the application level replication is that when something goes wrong up here, right, this kind of thing breaks. Now you have to copy this entire data set over to here, right? So I've got to take maybe a backup or some other kind of methodology and move all that data over. And I'm waiting while that's happening. And so let's say this one's up and running and I have to go fix this one. I'm also at risk, right? Just had an outage. Now I'm more at risk. What if something happens while I'm waiting for all this? And depending on the size of your data, this could take hours.
Sure. And so that being in that kind of exposed state when you're down a replica puts more risk at your business. When we talk about reseeding availability groups or any other application level replication, generally that's going to be based off of backups, right? And so we'll have some sort of backup target that'll receive our backups that we'll use to help reinitialize the replication mechanisms. Now, using Pure Storage's replication technologies inside of a backup target, we can enhance that restore scenario, reducing the amount of time it takes to restore a database 2 of replica in your availability group or application level replication. Now, looking forward to SQL Server 2022, let's talk about that specific scenario for availability groups. We can actually initialize and reinitialize an availability group from snapshots. And so inside of FlashArray, we can take a snapshot and use that to build initially an availability group or a reseeded availability group. And this isn't limited to just within an array. I can take this snapshot, replicate it to another array, whether it be in the same data center or between data centers for DR scenarios, and initialize this replica as well, getting me back into that high availability and DR posture more quickly to help protect the business from a failure. Sounds pretty cool.
I think it's great because, right, we have the backups. We know we can accelerate backups and all that. We know we can reduce that out. But now we're working with vendors like Microsoft, right? And they are realizing the value of some storage-based technologies as well and building it into their newer releases so that you can take advantage of these storage-related features and instantaneously restore your data so that you're not in that exposed state, which is really important as data sets grow.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing to bring home about that is the snapshot technology that we're talking about here is not a size of data operation. It'll be data reduced, right? So leveraging pure storage is data reduction, but then also almost immediate because we're able to bring that snapshot back into the instance very quickly inside of the array.
Right. Yeah. So now you're not worried about the size. It's really how long does it take for your database to recognize those volumes.
Correct.
That's all it takes.
Yes.
So the other scenario that I see a lot of times, right, we've got this complicated architecture going here that is great, but it cost extra space. And so when it comes to, and I think it's really important to have really good dev test environments, and we'll get to this later a little bit more, but I think dev test affects how your production environments run eventually. So a lot of times, because you have this extra factor of storage here, people do not have matching copies of this like in their lower environments, right? And then that means sometimes that they will do code pushes that work completely fine in a standalone environment. And now they go to something that has application replication. And they either have messed up and the code doesn't deploy, or they have some exacerbated factor, maybe where they tried to update massively a table on this side that now has to replicate all the way over here. So how do we help out with that dev test scenario?
So when I work with customers in consulting, if you're going to build a tier 1 HADR system, you need to have a like-for-like non-production environment to test things out like code pushes and operational aspects like patching and things like that. And so inside of FlashArray, we can leverage that data reduction capability that we talked about earlier. So I can have that database exposed to multiple replicas inside of our system, meaning I can continue to have dev test platforms without consuming the additional storage of having another copy of that database. And so we can leverage the data reduction capabilities of the array to do that. Now, how do I get that data there? We can use that same technique that we talked about a few minutes ago between arrays, and I could take that data and I can replicate it down and use that to reinitialize that over time. And so if we do have a large production environment, Marcia, that doesn't have to be a size of data operation to reseed or bring that data from production back down to dev test. We can leverage snapshots to make that a nearly instantaneous operation, just moving the deltas from the previous snapshot. And that's going to give you the ability to keep that dev test environment more up to date, which is traditionally very challenging if you had to do that with backup and restore.
Yeah, it is more than just the deltas, right? It's the deduped, compressed deltas. And so I think kind of doubling down on that, because we're getting that data reduction, that means that you can have more dev test environments, right? Get rid of some branching issues. And so some of our customers, while you pointed out earlier that we get normally 3.8 to 1 data reduction, our customers who are doing some of these things, they're not getting 3.8 to 1. They're getting like things like 48 to 1 data reduction, right? That's pretty cool. So, and because people don't have good dev test environments, the other thing that I see a lot, right, is what I call data disasters, right? This is a bad code push. This is an update without a where clause. You've never seen anything like that in your environments.
I've never done anything like that ever.
Yeah, no DBA ever would ever do anything like that. But when those kinds of things happen and you're doing application level replication, not only has that happened here, but it's now happened here. And so in a normal standalone environment, you only had to do one restore. But now you're stuck in this scenario of doing at least 2 restores, maybe 3, maybe 4.
Each being a size of data operation. And so let's look at how FlashArray can help with that. So leveraging array-based snapshots. Now, we can bring our system back to a good state from the previous snapshot. And what that's going to involve is offlining the availability group for a moment, and then taking a snapshot and cloning it back to each replica in the availability group. You might be thinking, well, if I have to take that offline, is that the best thing for my operations? No, but if you have to do a traditional database restore, that's going to be an offline operation as well. But that's going to be a size of data operation. So this is a large system. It's going to take as long as it takes. Using array-based snapshots, that can be nearly instantaneous to bring your availability group back to a good state on each of your replicas using array-based snapshots in place of traditional backup and restore, which would involve multiple restores across the environment.
Right. And that's the worst case scenario where you have to restore everything, right? So you're down either way. So let's try and minimize that. And I guess the other thing that you could do, let's say that table happened to be not critical.
Okay.
And the system's not down. You can also just mount a copy of that data, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then just move over into your AG
Yeah,
or
so-
your application level replication, the data that you messed up.
Yeah, so let's look at that scenario too. So we talked about bringing snapshots back to rebuild the entire AG, but what I could do is bring a copy of the database, as Marcia described, back to one of the instances, expose that to the instance, and just insert the records that were deleted into the primary instance and bring the system back to a known state, really reducing the amount of time it was down. Or actually never taking it down because we didn't have to in this scenario. We just brought another copy on and pulled the data out that was interesting to us that may or may not have gotten deleted when someone executed a bad query.
Right. And it didn't cost you that extra space. So it was really kind of a nominal kind of event.
Yes.
And so I think all of these things that we encourage our customers to realize is that because there is data reduction and deduplication, don't think always about replacing your availability groups and your application replication.
Right.
With storage-based replication, there are scenarios that we will do that. But think about all the different ways that your storage does data movement, that you do data movement, and we can augment and improve your capabilities and those failure points that you have within your application replication.
Right on.
Thank you for joining us today and talking about application level replication.